For the first time in human history, human beings from all over the world all have access to a shared repository of human knowledge and culture, controlled decentrally, from which one can find inspiration and build from. This central mainframe allows people from all different sorts of lives to cross and intertwine paths, freely converging into and diverging out of association with each other, of free volition, thus providing countless new potential platforms for new culture and premises, facilitating and recording human subjectivity with more diversity than ever before. It enables the following of a nomadic and whimsical train of thought that can be more genuine and authentic than any other method of personal inquiry. This very video is on it. You can even use it to start a dialogue with people like myself. This is the internet. And yet, despite this ideal being more satisfied than ever before, something is not right. Despite arguably having the capacity to connect with a wider variety of people more easily and immediately than ever before, many people seem to feel more disconnected, alienated, and lonely. In 1985, this study showed that the most common number of close friends among Americans was 3. And yet, on a repeat of the same study in 2004, it had been overtaken by 0, with 42% of the US population lacking non-familial confidants. The COVID-19 pandemic would later take a particular toll, but even now that the pandemic is over, British figures have shown that loneliness has failed to retreat back to pre-pandemic levels. Roughly half of men and a third of women under 30 are reported as single, and while this is often simply a matter of choice, loneliness does also correlate with decreased life expectancy, lower self-esteem, poorer mental health, higher stress levels, and even lower ambition, altogether costing British employers up to £2.5 billion per year. Furthermore, loneliness has also shown distinct correlation with susceptibility to ideology. Belief in conspiracy theories ballooned during isolation, in which the population seemingly had greater distance from the social phenomena they sought to explain. This is true too of gender relations. The tendency to essentialize behavior, motivations, and perspectives to gender and sex, when both are assemblages of a wide range of spectral phenomena, often appears far more as a naive depiction of the opposite gender than a product of empirical experience, let alone scientific study. Prejudice about the supposedly genetic predispositions of different demographics is always easier to sell to someone who has no personal connections to an individual from that group, where their individual nuances are less immediately visible. There has been much discourse recently about a wide variety of reactionary narratives about relationships and gender that have come to proliferate online, and there are many good assessments and rebuttals to such a movement. There seems to be a general request in particular for figures on the left to reach out to young people and provide some advice. So as a philosopher who deals with questions relating to interpersonal convergence and divergence, as well as a focus on subjectivity, I would like to take this video to posit my own frameworks for how we might better understand the complex world of relationships, friendship, love, community, and so forth. I truly hope this can help someone somewhere out there. One must make a choice on how to approach interpersonal relationships, and indeed happiness more broadly. Within online discourse, this dichotomy has recently become most commonly framed as one between a blue pill and a red pill, i.e. between the romanticized idyllic view of love painted in popular media and film, and the supposed cold hard reality of what ends up usually being evolutionary pseudopsychology and reductive overgeneralization. Again, if you're interested in a video going over the fallacies of red pill ideology, check the description. But in my opinion, neither are constructive approaches, so I find more use in drawing the dichotomy between situation and spectacle, concepts taken from the work of a guy called Guy Debord and his Situationist International. Debord saw that society was changing from people relating to each other through lived experiences to people relating through commodities, which represent those experiences. With the onslaught of an ever-expanding market economy attempting to reify and commodify all experiences, i.e. reduce them to representations that can be given numerical exchange value and traded, Who you are becomes increasingly about the products you consume, how you interact with the things that simulate the experiences to which we identified in the past. Jean Baudrillard expanded on this theory by positing the notion of the hyperreal, that these simulations or simulacra had culturally become more real or more true than the actual things that they initially strove to represent. Our interactions with these commodities, these simulations, thus come to signify status, creating a whole new type of value, sign value, adding perceived value to each commodity based on what it signifies about its possessor. To indulge in spectacle is to lean into this acceptance of representations and simulations in place of the real thing. So if one approaches dating as spectacle, your potential partner is no longer a subjective agent themselves, capable of creating pleasurable situations with you through a collision of your respective subjective ways of thinking and living, but rather is a heavily advertised packaged product, a representation, teasing certain desirable outcomes, echoing the vision of a life you wish you had. You know when you see an ad for a product and you feel that it would solve your problems, would make you a new you, get you closer to the person you look up to or wish you could be, so you feel a temporary rush of happiness through the anticipation of such changes that the product in reality rarely will live up to? That is spectacle right there. Both blue pill and red pill start from the culturally established approach to love that is heavily rooted in spectacle. You first sort people into genders, one of which you commit subconsciously to be interested in, and then you reduce each gender to a hyperreal archetype, most commonly based on the norms of and roles imposed by patriarchy. For the blue pill approach, one uses their assemblage of preferred traits to filter a pool of people one could potentially be interested in, then expresses their interest through expected social conventions and sees if anything sticks, a bit like casting a fishing rod. Within the mythology of the red pill, one instead evaluates the members of your chosen gender as if they were commodities, in how they match up to that archetype, and then you pick one that matches your own value. The red pill is in many senses a somewhat cynical view of love through concepts of economics. It is neoliberalism come to human relations and is rooted in spectacle. I would strongly caution against it, both due to the reactionary narratives it perpetuates, in turn which limit or constrain human subjective expression through social anchors like patriarchy and its rigid norms, as well as the fact that spectacle is often, time and time again, an unsustainable means of creating long-term happiness. If your goal is to interact with other people and make yourself happy, I do not find it productive, for this cynical view will either deliver you to a rigid, repressive, orthodox rule set with which you must march strictly in line, which can prove both internally and externally toxic to the well-being of yourself and those around you, or to a destructive and sometimes deadly nihilism. Furthermore, downplaying the subjectivity of your love interests can result in toxic disregard for them in the form of objectification, potentially undermining consent and sincerity. Interestingly enough, one of the few places where this framing of gender war has already been shoehorned into electoral politics was in South Korea. The anti-feminist Yoon presidency has been hugely divisive and left South Korea with the largest disparity between male and female politics across the world. Incidentally, their birth rate has dropped dramatically and is now the lowest in the world. Meanwhile, 5% of its population under 35 now practice extreme isolation in the face of a cutthroat, late-stage capitalist society of expectation and competition. There appears to be a clear tendency across the various activities from which humans derive happiness, such as those which trigger the release of neurotransmitter hormones like serotonin and dopamine, of cycles of tension and release. Evolutionarily speaking, this is unsurprising, given that so many important elements to the continuation of the species, breathing, sexuality, accomplishment, exercise, and so on, seem to themselves be cycles of tension and release, so it would make sense that those with biology rewarding delayed gratification would be most successful in natural selection. In this sense, anticipation can play an essential role in happiness, motivation, and creative energy. However, spectacle artificially inflates that anticipation to levels that are simply unsustainable. to the extent that the happiness derived from spectacular activity is no longer in the resolution, in the release, but in anticipation of a release that the real-world resolution will never live up to. Thus, the subject is left reliant on greater and greater spectacle to satisfy themselves, in a feedback loop that can spin out of control and which often manifests in an absorption in a hollow, materialistic, meaningless existence. Much like indulging in drug use or gambling, indulging in spectacle is clearly unsustainable and thus risks long-term unfulfillment and self-destructive practices. This could be mindless consumption to fill a void of meaning. It could be an overemphasis on performativity of wealth, virtue, or anything else. Or, in the case of dating, it could lead to further loneliness and dissatisfaction. However, we could also find spectacle within speculative financial bubbles and the institution of property itself, the appeal of which roots itself in the anticipation of scarcity, to the extent that it manufactures artificial scarcity itself in a destructive feedback loop. So spectacle represents a loss of human agency and control to these types of feedback loops. Whether property is an application of spectacle or spectacle is an overextension of property may be debatable, but it is without doubt that the expansion of the commodity form, private ownership, and a capitalist marketplace into matters like love and relationships has introduced spectacle to them on an unprecedented scale. Capital's more recent ventures, such as online dating, play straight into spectacular tendencies and further perpetuate them, directly advertising people to one another as shallow, performatively curated representations, directing people into spectacle, all in service of their own profits. The marketplace rewards competition, exploitation, and the application of a financial lens over everything one does. Is it any surprise that when it is introduced to human relations, the outcome is a cynical world of shallow individual pleasure-seeking in transactional relationships, with the remaining communal partnerships discouraged by financial pressures from having children or spending time with loved ones, in whichever arrangements suit? The neoliberal premise that putting everything on a market is a panacea fit to end history clearly leads us only to the destructive effects of spectacle. If we are to view our partners, not even our partners, rather the magic of a relationship, as products that are going to come along and fix our lives completely and make everything magically happy forever, then we aren't treating those partners as people. We're fetishizing them and attaching unsustainable criteria for satisfaction onto them, which fundamentally isn't pleasant, healthy, or satisfying for them or for us. When one views finding a partner as shopping for the perfect product, kitted out with all the right specifications, the process is generally superficial, underwhelming, and unforgiving. The human is commodity, dating is commanded by spectacle. It's all very easy for people to say, treat other people as people, and it is indeed good advice, albeit quite vague. However, if we want to get to the essence of what a non-spectacular approach to dating or relationships would be, this is what we're talking about. We would need to scale back the representations and archetypes, scale back the fetishes and psychological associations we assign, and instead repersonalize society. To Debord, the answer to spectacle was what came to be known as situationism, an anti-spectacular practice focusing on creating genuine interpersonal experiences from which to source one's happiness instead. So, let's propose a different narrative. In the real, material world, two autonomous subjects with their own agency come across one another. They begin to observe the other's behavior, their personality, and what drives them. They begin to get a sense of what that person represents and the mission they are on in life. It is intriguing to them, and they find each other interesting, unique, and in many ways admirable. One day, they decide to spend some time together so that they can get to know each other better. They both enjoy each other's company so much that they begin to spend more time together and collaborate towards a shared desire. And as they spend more time together, they become more and more alike through sharing experiences and creating shared culture together, shared inside jokes, rituals, traditions. Who they are and what they want to be is converging into an increasingly more similar goal. Combining their two unique ways produces a whole new uniqueness that they are proud to be a part of. Another day, the couple decide to make an official commitment to converging with one another, continuing to grow closer and closer through shared experiences and culture. They pledge to have each other's back and support their partner. Their ambitions are now to be mixed together in a shared vision that they can both trust each other to defend. One is in pain to see the other hurt, and in joy to see the other happy. They feel they can share anything with each other, their deepest secrets, their most intimate moments, and their vulnerabilities, knowing that it will all be reciprocated in time and is going to a safe place. They care deeply about each other and dote upon each other. They are fiercely loyal and devoted to each other and believe in each other's dreams. They love each other once they have become integral to each other. They value their unique combination, and it's that foundation on which they might even choose to raise a child or start a shared creative project, a physical embodiment of that combination. They grow old together and experience different phases of life together from a similar angle. When one of them eventually dies, the other feels like a part of themselves has been taken away. Their love, as described here, is made of situations. It's about real people crossing paths with one another and choosing to invest themselves in each other, trust in each other, create something with each other. It's about real experiences in real time. It's living as art, not living as economics. This depiction of a relationship, one which deals with individual people and not representations, generalities, or fixed processes, is thus one that avoids the pitfalls of objectification. It frames finding a partner as an intersection of interests on subjective planes, instead of two people adopting roles in a preset ritual, the latter of which never having been a depiction that resonated with my own experience. And surely it's more beautiful, too, than the idea of one's counterpart merely being an object of pursuit. But moreover, if we look at a relationship through this framing, it can yield various insights and advice that are otherwise missed by these spectacular approaches, which may in turn help those who seek companionship to more successfully attain it. One such reflection would be that if you want a sort of dating based around a mutual resonance of subjectivities, then understanding and displaying your subjectivity more outwardly may help your unique essence become more visible. Mapping out your subjectivity in the abstract and then harnessing it into something that's actually tangible gives you something you can point to, something you can be proud of, something that you can have on hand which represents you, for those who might be potentially captivated by you and your framework. You might end up meeting people doing similar things to you and have collaborative experiences and connections which expand your own creativity, and you can also contribute a potential source of inspiration to other people, which is satisfying in its own right. So whatever it is that you spend your time doing, or whatever media you spend time consuming, or the topics on your mind, why not make something out of it? Why not express something artistically, or get something published or self-published online? At the same time, do remember that you don't necessarily have to be exceptional yet for someone to appreciate your idiosyncrasies and see potential within them. Being a genuine friend to the people around you, without them having to understand your genius quite yet, is still something that many people in this world find appreciable. Absolutely, do try to be the model of the ethical system, implicit or explicit, which you hold, but you do not need to be perfect before you start looking for real connections with real people. And over time, as two people equally committed to a mutual interest in one another share experiences and culture and grow together in a shared direction, they will naturally tailor themselves somewhat to each other, which can be a source of exceptionality even to those who are not convinced of their own uniqueness themselves. You see, with a cynical, spectacular approach to dating, which falls prone to essentialism, often there is an emphasis not on the unique essence or nuances of each individual, but rather where they compare to others on certain scales, conventional attractiveness, wealth, intelligence, charisma, and so forth. It is easy to fall into dismay that there will likely be someone out there who outmatches you on such metrics, and maybe it's true that someone would be able to set an initial impression more effectively than you did. But it doesn't matter, because when the inevitable sense of self-identification settles in, not something that can be expected immediately, of course, but over time it'll develop as you converge, your exceptionality for one another will be established, such that those metrics won't matter too much anymore. On one brief aside, it is naturally nice to be recognized as exceptional in some manner or other, but if you're counting on that as a strategy to woo someone, remember that we want that recognition to come from another person, subjective and complex in their own right. So blanketly idolizing someone without condition is probably not an advisable strategy, let alone a substitute for having a developed life of one's own. People are always changing and always developing as the world around us changes and develops. We're always taking in new information that changes the way we respond to new information thereafter. And this is precisely why these supposedly static representative attributes fail to tell the whole story, and instead underestimate the power of intertwined continual development. Knowing this, another piece of advice might be to allow oneself and others the freedom to change, develop, and adapt fluidly, perhaps even radically at times. Freeing oneself from regimentation and allowing oneself to more nomadically follow subjective whim and the passion of any particular moment may help facilitate not only your ability to meaningfully converge, but also to maximize the role of subjectivity in your life, subjectivity which someone else might resonate with. Likewise, remaining open to different sorts of people and connections would give your counterpart the courtesy to do the same. If there's one message of advice I can impart, escape the spectacle. Acquaint yourself and interact with higher feelings of meaning than the materialistic symbols. Engage with others of all genders sincerely, genuinely, and open-mindedly. Treat them as subjective agents themselves. Know who you are and be proud of that which you choose to represent. This may make higher education quite a good environment for such interactions, but it's by no means the only way to meet people and share situations with them. This repersonalization of society is desperately necessary not only between lovers, but also within the workplace and the town square. While finding friendship and connection is a question of individual agency and can never be mandated, clearly there are systemic obstacles and social anchors that impede and alienate us. So our rejection of spectacle can not only be a matter of personal conduct, but of collective action to identify, resist, and overthrow such systems. There are many political and philosophical objectives I've expressed before. I place priority on culture, cooperation, and generative expression, all of which rely on our ability to converge with one another. I aim for a nomadic usufructarian communism which relies on our ability to communalize with one another. And I want to maintain human decency and empathy, which relies upon repersonalization. Each of these three things, convergence, communalization, and repersonalization, are all exertions of a sort of social trust that is quite frankly under attack. In a world where exploitation is normalized, where the prescience of monetary transaction and financial status looms behind every opportunity we are offered and every activity we engage in, where we all are competing to make a buck off somebody else, it is no surprise that this trust is waning. Social cohesion is at stake. Discrimination, crime, callousness, and abuse of power become easier and easier to fall prey to, causing social trust only to decay further, leaving us further alienated, less happy, and less culturally enriched. To bring this trust back, we have to look for what is turned human against human, why we act on the basis of pursuit of our own individual interests as a zero-sum game. On paper, progress doesn't need to be zero-sum. We live in a world of such technological advancement that the vast majority could advance our interests more effectively through a commitment to collaboration at a rate that would allow us to adapt and overcome inevitable natural scarcities, focusing our competition against external threats. Bookchin calls it complementarity, a society in which we can get more by collaborating with each other through consistent commitment to shared long-term projects than by cheating each other and running off with the goods. But ownership of yet unused resources and capital disrupt this. The fact everything is bought up creates an artificial scarcity that structures progress as zero-sum, even when it naturally is not. The institution of property and its speculative feedback loops are our obstacle to complementarity, and thus this is the social anchor I feel most deserving of our attack, if we want to strive for a society where that social trust can be revitalized in all its forms. Depersonalisation, which requires a deficiency in social cohesion and trust, is an exercise in objectification, defining people to certain roles and eliminating further individuality so as to regiment and streamline society towards some vision or objective, usually profit. Often the object which the person has been reduced to is also reified, reduced to numerical value, and treated in cold statistical terms. Both of these phenomena of depersonalization exemplify the phenomenon of distance, which along with spectacle constitute the tools through which owners of capital can weaponize price discrimination and condition fetishes around their goods or services by obscuring or embellishing the realities of their chain of production. Distance, be it in the form of the division of labor, in the obscuring of supply chains, or the usage of gig work, is an exercise in what we could call degenerative entification, an attempt to remove key nuances for the worker or the consumer so as to prime them for spectacular narratives and exploitation. It is a sort of systemic sociopathy that hides away the brutal realities of our system so that they do not disturb us, and so that we are less driven to resist them. But if we want a world where we do not suffer injustice, we must repersonalize our relations with one another across supply and production chains. We must remind ourselves that our numerical representations are real people with real lives. Social stratification, a result of the feedback loop of exponential accumulation intrinsic to the logic of property, is one of the dynamics which breaks social cohesion and social trust, which in turn allows for depersonalization to fester. Most discussions of social class in the past 200 years often refer back to the work of Karl Marx, who identified the conflicts in society between different economic classes of people based on their differing relations to production, distribution, and exchange, giving them different interests. To Marx, a society of social cohesion would have to be a classless one. In the contemporary age, many analysts, perhaps most notably Yanis Varoufakis, are starting to liken late-stage capitalism to a system which looks increasingly feudal. Exploitation is becoming increasingly multi-layered, with each person being assigned and classified to a more specific role in the production process. The feedback loops that stratified society into classes continue to stratify, further classifying the population into further and further specificity. Property, clothed as a capitalist meritocracy, is devolving into rigidity in a similar manner to its preceding outfit of feudal meritocracy. As our society currently encourages a degree of pessimism towards our fellow citizens, how can we get around this to build friendships and relationships? How can we start to repersonalize? The importance of community presence cannot be understated here. Engaging in repeat activities alongside others, be it in clubs or societies or unions or religions or all kinds of other groups, will sow the seeds of familiarity and trust, a precondition to forming personal friendships. Allowing these seeds to grow will empower both you and the people around you to take increasing leaps of faith and trust in one another. So building community spaces, activities and identities, and involving oneself within them, will undoubtedly play an important role here. Trust is something personal. It is both what builds and sustains friendship and compassion for one another. A more compassionate and friendly society, one that is therefore happier, must be a more personal society, is one made up of situations and not of spectacle. I cannot stress enough just how significant the subject matter of this video is in understanding the framework which I have been trying to articulate in the videos of this series. Love, trust, and all forms of interpersonal relationships are crucially intertwined with our assessment of truth and knowledge itself, something that we aspire to elucidate through cranioanalysis, which, at its most basic, is encapsulated in 3 key principles. 1. understanding all entities that we refer to in our thought to be multiplicities, subdivisible into ongoing processes underneath them. Entities include epistemes or truths, concepts, nouns, instincts, and more. 2. Advocating the start point endpoint fulcrum model as a productive, albeit not inherent, framing to understand and explore the process behind each of these entities in cognitively manageable steps. Fulcrum charts can be drawn to visualize this model of analysis. 3. Pragmatically engaging in the creation and subversion of entities and protocols to maximize the generation and accumulation of subjective expression and abstract thought. I've made a compilation of videos from the channel concerning this subject in closer detail, which I'll link in the description. In it, we've talked about how and when to create, solidify, and attack fulcra, usually on a personal level. By converging into social groups and accepting the shared foundational premises of that social group, one can tap into developed traditions of esoteric in-group knowledge, and by diverging out, one can retreat from it. And thus the freedom to exercise both as fluidly as possible is thus critical for generative personal expression. But we've also alluded to collective internalization, where fulcra turn into de facto objectivities, and collective consensus around, or framing of, truth, and how these can establish feedback loops which perpetuate a specific sort of ideological conditioning. We as individuals cannot be the only targets of our analysis, but also society more completely. De facto objectivity is to society as fulcra are to the individual. Ken Wilber's integral theory aims to categorize all theory into 4 quadrants, that which examines the individual subject, the collective subject, the individual object, and the collective object. This series aims to present theory covering all 4 of these quadrants, so that we might be empowered to comprehensively examine each. Assessing and challenging one's internal fulcra deals with the individual subject. Analyzing and addressing de facto objectivity represents an approach to the collective subject. The individual object is discussed within our identification of biological anchors, and finally we examine the collective object through the prism of social anchors. Truth in a social sense, not solely a personal sense, is governed by convergence and divergence, 2 vital dynamics of interpersonal relations that shape society on almost every conceivable level. Convergence creates de facto objectivity, and divergence destroys it. Much like personal cranioanalysis, pragmatically weaving in and out of tradition, protocol, and various entities is also something we must strive for on a social level, and thus we must be cognizant of the ways in which we interact with these forces and their implications on society and ourselves. I am a firm believer in humanity and its capability to actively affect and improve the rules and structures by which we live, and a cranioanalytic understanding of truth, both in how it is enshrined and how it can be challenged, is a vital tool for taking back dynamic democratic control of our lives. Love is, in many ways, an epitome of convergence. As an ultimate form of convergence, it is a creator and solidifier of truths or premises upon which one lives their lives. Lovers intertwine, both in shared experiences and in shared ideas and concepts, creating a unique platform that serves as the foundation for a relationship, sometimes even to be imparted onto a newborn child, as a foundation for a new individual consciousness with a new subjective framework of their own. All social groups may have shared protocol for shared process, shared fulcra which become de facto objectivity within that group, but nowhere is this more intensely, comprehensively, and demonstrably practiced than in our relationship of love. Love is the birth of culture, a force of creation and tradition building, and we are in desperate need of a society in which we are increasingly liberated to fall in and out of love. Just imagine yourself on a disparate plane, a void full of other human agents, all constantly in motion. You come together and intertwine yourself with some for a time, and you split apart from them and move off in your own directions when that connection is no longer generative. This is the craniomodern ideal, the omnibundist ideal, whatever you like to call it. Convergence and divergence freed from regimentation and objectification, maximizing human agency over the truths that internally govern us through fulcra and externally govern us through de facto objectivity and social anchors, enabling us to nomadically follow what is most productive to us. It is an exercise in free assembly, an exercise in community, and ultimately an exercise in love. Through love, we shall build worlds as we have never built before.